marzipan. I hope everybody here. Okay, I hope everybody here is for making marzipan. That's our topic today. Think of this as medieval Play-Doh, right? Kind of. Okay. I have a digital handout, and let's just put this in here again for the people. Oh, thank you, Lissa. You're really Johnny on the spot there. And that gives a bit of historic background as well as two recipes, and the recipe that I'm redacting, and a bunch of sources, and a little bit on food safety and all of that good stuff. So, marzipan, the earliest that I have been able to document it, which is not necessarily the earliest that it is to the early 16th century, about 1520, a cookbook that was originally published in Catalan, so Iberian Peninsula. There are competing early histories that would go off to different locations besides that. And I'm not going to go too much into it other than there are some competing claims that it's of German origin or maybe of Arab origin or so forth. And I was not able to really hunt down and trace that, but I can very confidently place this to late period because there's a number of 16th century cookbooks that that cover it. And since reading primarily in English, my sources do favor English language stuff. There's a reference to marzipan in Romeo and Juliet, Act 1, Scene 5, in some of the servants' dialogue. And Queen Elizabeth I, on the 1st of January, 1585, she received a New Year present consisting of a number of things from her master cook, including what was then called marchpane, which was the earlier English spelling of marzipan. And moving along a little bit, I decided to redact a recipe specifically for this class, and it comes from a 1584 recipe in an English language cookbook. And I've got the entire recipe printed out on page 2 of our handout. It's a big, thick paragraph, and I go point by point in the handout, going over it. One of the things that I want to point out is the ratio of almonds to sugar. You will find different ratios in different places, and I've decided to go with basically a low sugar content, both because that was in the original recipe and because a highly esteemed, how would you say it, mundane/modern form of marzipan uses just about the same ratio. The recipe that I've got published calls for rose water, which I have a bottle of right here, and I will not actually be using in the demo, mainly because for health reasons. I have a life-threatening allergy to most of the things in the Rosaceae botanical family, and I don't feel like going into anaphylaxis in front of you. But rose water is called for in the recipe. And the period recipe that I'm redacting is a recipe for comfits, which includes adding sugar-coated nuts and seeds. I'm not doing that. Basically, if I were doing the complete version, once I make the marzipan paste, you would be baking it for a short time, sort of almost like an almond cookie, where you would put a sugar-coated nut in the center and then bake it for a short time. And you've got all of the documentation for taking that, but we're not quite going with that. Now, traditionally, egg serves as a binder, which gets into food safety issues because there is a risk of salmonella. About 35 years ago in North America, salmonella was a considerably higher risk than it is right now. And you will find in the sources, a bit on the background of that. And there is an optional cooking instruction. Basically, if you get to 165 degrees Fahrenheit, it kills salmonella instantly. So if you want to bake it very quickly up to that temperature and make it food safe, you absolutely can. Right now, the incidence of salmonella in the United States is about 1 egg in 30,000. That is a risk that I am personally willing to take. If you choose to play it safer, everything you need in order to take that extra step is included in your handout. And then there's the question of whether to use almond flour or whole almonds. And I will sort of verbally go through what would be if you want to get that out the whole 9 yards and do it the medieval way, how to do that. But for the demo here, just because the camera goes better in my living room than in my kitchen, I'll sort of step you through this. Basically, many of you here might already be familiar with blanching. But basically what you would do is you would take whole almonds with skin on, boil some water, drop them in for about 1 minute, and then fish them out with a strainer or a slotted spoon or something like that, put them on the side, and then you're basically just shucking the skins off the almonds. That's just enough cooking for the skin to separate. Now, one thing that I recommend if you're going that route is to, when you take the almonds out of the blanching, put them into a bowl and cover it over with a cloth. That helps to prevent the almonds from drying out. When they dry out, the skins don't want to come off so much. So if you keep the cloth on, that just makes it easier to shuck. Also be a little bit careful because once the skin pops off of the almond likes to go flying. So be careful, have a hand covering it, shuck it down into a bowl, and then you'll have a nice pile of almond skins collecting, which I like to compost. You can see my youngest right there, that her name is Dot, which you might be able to tell from the dot on her head. And no, Dot, you are not allowed onto my work table. She's a smart girl. Her brother is right behind the camera. So when you do that, most of the work will actually go into shucking the almonds. You will get shucked almonds like this. Now, one warning, don't use slivered almonds. Don't try to get the skins off of slivered almonds because it's so much work. I mean, technically you could do it, but it's a lot of work to use whole almonds. If you're using slivers, then you're dealing with little tiny almond skin bits, and it's not worth it. So eventually you will get down to, if you were grinding it in a mortar and pestle, the medieval way, you would get down to an almond flour, which you can now buy rather easily because the gluten-free trend has made almond flour a lot more. I think the gluten-free and the ketogenic diet, it's just made almond flour much easier to get. I bought this at Trader Joe's. I'm sorry, not at Trader Joe's, at Costco. But you can source this pretty easily now. The next thing is sugar. And if you want to dive down the rabbit hole of whether or not you would be using white sugar, that's its own thing. But basically, by late period where we're talking about, refined sugar was available. It was expensive, but this was something that would be given to monarchs and so forth. So are you going to be using granulated sugar? This is my granulated sugar, or powdered sugar. The one thing to be aware of, and I don't think that this would really be an issue unless you're doing it for competition, Modern powdered sugar has cornstarch added to reduce clumping. So if you're going to be a real purist, it would be easier to take either regular granulated sugar or superfine sugar, what's sometimes called caster sugar in some English language countries, and grind that down. It's not going to be quite as smooth. For this class, I will be using powdered sugar, but I do want to just make you aware if you were going to enter this marzipan in a competition. So I have some notes here on, I think it's page, which page of the handout? Page 3 of the handout. Pointers about how to blanch almonds and have the minimal number of incidents. So I have 2 recipes here, one which calls for the whole almond method and the other which calls for the almond flour method. What I will be demoing here is the almond flour method right before the references, and I try to make the references reasonably well organized by topic, so that if you're recreating this or if you wanted to submit documentation, you're ready to go. Now for today, I have 2 cups of almond flour that I've already measured out, and that is going into my food processor. I put in the blade first, and then pour in the almond flour. I hope you can see this. Now I have 1 cup of powdered sugar, and because you want to get this as smooth as possible, I'm using a flour sifter, which can sift sugar as well as anything else. It doesn't take particularly long to do it, and I'm going to add this a bit at a time. Now the next thing that I do is I close this off, and this is going to be a little bit noisy. My food processor is actually an immersion blender with an attachment. So for about $35 US, give or take, you can get one of these, and it will have several attachments on it. So it's time to go. Oh, wait a second. I almost forgot one thing. The egg. Now, the rule with this is you separate the egg, which is fairly simple to do. You tap it on a surface, and leave the egg white here. Pass it from one half of the shell to the other a couple of times. Be careful not to break the yolk. Set the yolk aside. And you have a separated egg yolk. Now also in the recipe that I'm using, I'm going to be adding 1 teaspoon of almond extract. This is optional. And then if I were going to add rose water, I would be adding it right now, 1 tablespoon. So, start this. Now, one thing you will notice as you're working on marzipan is that it'll be loose at a certain point and then it gets clumpy. And one of the problems with making homemade marzipan, while you'll see in some home cookbooks they don't even advise you to try to make it at home, is that after it breaks up, the oils start getting released, and it doesn't really want to do anymore. So what I've learned to do with it is add a little bit of sugar at a time. And that way, you help to get a really smooth marzipan. The risk is it kind of gets gritty. Having a food processor that you can pick up and shake like you just saw me do, that helps too. If you have any questions right now while I'm in between adding more of it, this is a good time. Okay. Sometimes in a sifter, the last little bits don't want to go out, so I just take the pestle from a mortar and pestle to break it up through the screen. And we're just there. Get out this last bit. And there is your first batch of marzipan. If you want, you can use food colorings, use natural food colorings such as dandelion or artificial ones. And we've got a nice, smooth, very almondy and not too sweet marzipan dough right there. Now, if you'd like to see me demo this with whole almonds, I can measure out and do a second demo with whole almonds. But I think I'm going to pause things here for student feedback and questions. So go ahead and hop in.
I have a question.
Sure.
At what date did the egg white start to be added? Because I know the earlier recipes didn't necessarily have that.
I think there is already egg white in the recipe that I redacted. Let me set this aside and go through the So this is 1584.
Okay.
That's right. Let me double check on this. No, I think that they're using rose water in place of egg in this one.
I've made it both ways, so I was just wondering when the egg started to be a thing.
Yeah. I've got a bunch on egg safety, but I don't think that I have in my recipe the date when egg got added to the recipe as in my handout. I don't think I have that in my research. Excellent question.
Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions here? Lucia? You're good? Okay, if anybody else doesn't want to unmute, or if you just are shy, whatever, feel free to type a question into the text chat. And If you are good so far, then here it is, 20 minutes into the class, and I've already made this. I know that it could go quickly. So I will, if you will bear with me as I depart the screen for a second, I will get another measuring cup, and we can do this over, except using whole almonds this time, if you'd like to see a demo using the whole almond. Does that sound good?
That would be really, really nice.
Okay.
And if we still have extra time, we'll play with marzipan.
Okay. Okay, so I'm back. I'm going to go ahead and take this and cover it with a tea towel so that it doesn't dry out while I'm doing my second demo. And of course, I'll have 2 wonderful pounds of marzipan here. And now to measure it out a second time. Okay. First, I've got this, and I've got 1 cup here. So, 1 cup of almond. Slightly under 2 cups of blanched almonds. This is a 1/4 cup measure because this is a fairly tight thing here. Okay, I'm going to put this in here for sifting. Okay, slightly under 1 cup. Now, almond extract, 1 teaspoon. We found the best price on this through Amazon. Just so you can see the supplier. This is called Chef Ovan from Rockford, Ohio. 16-ounce bottle. And another egg. And I think if anybody who's taking this class doesn't have experience separating eggs, I think our handout also includes a tutorial to how to separate an egg. I am about to rinse my fingers, though.
So while you're rinsing your fingers, what's your reasoning behind the almond extract? Because I'm guessing they didn't include almond extract in the period recipes.
I note that as an optional thing, and if I were doing this for competition, I would not be adding almond extract.
But you just find it tastes better, or?
Yeah, it makes the flavor a little bit more intense.
Okay. I bet you also, because you don't use rose water for darn fine reason, it probably also gets you a little bit more liquid.
That's true. It does. And, sorry about the rose water.
No, not dying is a really valid reason not to use it. Heartily in favor.
Okay. So now what tends to happen when you're using whole almonds, and this is why so many cookbooks tell you not to, is it will get up to a certain point and it will just turn gritty. So I'll show you, plug your ears, here goes. Now this is the point where things usually go bad for home cooks, because I'll show you, if I'm not careful here, the blades will just spin at the bottom of this food processor and really nothing's see? And this is where people get held up, because basically this is creating an open airspace, and if you use a wooden spoon and push things down, it's going to create another open airspace, because there's just enough, the almonds are broken up just enough that the oil has started to be released, and the oil makes it congeal before it really breaks up into a fine paste. And that is why I learned to add a little bit of powdered sugar at a time. By doing that, you help to keep it from congealing so much. And this is something that I discovered by trial and error, so that's kind of why it became a class. Plug your ears, here it goes again. It helps to have a food processor that, like I was doing, you can pick up and tilt and shake a little bit, because that helps to free it up. Here we go again. Now, in a medieval kitchen, of course, you would probably have a 15-year-old scullery maid at a mortar and pestle for 3 hours, cursing under her breath.
I am very grateful that my apprentice greenbelt does not come with hours of mortar and pestle time.
There we go. Okay, here goes. Now there's a bit more to go. I think I'm going to start using the pestle here. I went through a couple of different fancy sifters, and I found the one that I liked best was just this really old school, like what my grandmother had in the 1940s style. Sometimes there's a good design and there's no sense trying to improve on it. Okay, ready to go. This does require a little bit more stirring to get all of the powdered sugar in. And there's a little bit more powdered sugar that collected at the bottom of that bowl. So I'm going to toss that in. As you can see, when you're using whole almonds, it just does take more attention. Let's stir this a little bit. Make sure the bits that were cut along the sides will get a chance to mix in. Run this again. As you can see, it does go when you shake it, but you have to be, it's a little bit of a workout to do this way. Stop here. Check the consistency. Still a little bit gritty. It's moving though. We'll do this again. And I may go ahead and add a little bit more sugar in here because it does need some more dry stuff. Since my supply on the powdered sugar is a little low, I'm just going to add a couple of tablespoons. Of granulated sugar. And here, not quite as fine as we had before, but definitely there. And if I weren't in the middle of a demo, I'd probably let this go a couple more times. But we have definitely achieved marzipan. And we've gotten past that clumpy stage where most home cooks get hung up. I will leave this here, and somebody else is in the kitchen right now, so I will just keep my sticky hand up in the air. But can I answer any more questions for you? I hope that was an illustrating set of demos.
Have you found any difference between almonds that you've blanched yourselves and the blanched almonds I can buy at the bulk food store, or have you tried?
I haven't really tried pre-blanched almonds. I imagine that those would work about the same as blanching them yourself. If you do blanch them yourself, I think I include this in the notes. Set them out to dry for about a day because you don't want any more liquid in them than necessary.
That makes sense.
I can't believe how quick and easy it is to make marzipan. That's just amazing.
It is dangerous knowledge.
Yes.
May I suggest something for mundane uses?
Sure.
Okay. Now, if you want to impress the hell out of people while you're still being pretty lazy, start with the flour, make marzipan. Mix them up into little bowls. Then take semi-sweet chocolate, melt it in the microwave. How you do that, you take a microwave-safe bowl, break it up into little chunks, or use, semi-sweet chocolate chips, run it for 30 seconds at a time, then stop and stir, and after about 2 minutes, it'll be ready. Then you take a spoon, you dip your marzipan balls, you set it out on parchment paper, let it cool. Then you sprinkle powdered sugar on top, and you have made yourself marzipan truffles from scratch. Or another thing that you can do is take your marzipan, roll it up into a log, refrigerate it overnight. Okay, slice it up. Melt some chocolate, dip 1/2 of each of the slices into that. Let it cool. Now you've got marzipan dipped cookies, all from scratch.
Would you like to see a cookie I made yesterday? I have one of those rolling pins that has the designs on it.
Oh, I'd love to see. Yeah,
Ooh,
please show.
hold on, let me get it. There it is. Did that come up?
There it is.
Oh, yeah. I think you posted that earlier. Those are gorgeous.
That's just off of one of those little rolling pins that I had found, and I just rolled the marzipan out and then rolled this over at one time.
That's from one of those laser cut wooden rolling pins. That is gorgeous. Yeah, there's a whole lot you can do. I am not all that great at making fruit from marzipan. I think that the fruit type of marzipan is post-period. I wasn't able to verify that to period, but I've tried it, and all I can suggest is work your color into the marzipan like Play-Doh before you start to shape it, because if you try to paint it afterward, I'm sorry, I got some of the sorriest looking marzipan apples by trying to make a wash and paint it afterward. Okay, so 37 minutes, and that is it, unless there are other questions.
Let me double check what's in chat.
Decent small bit of marzipan rolled in a crescent roll and shoved into a Dutch oven over a campfire. Rose syrup and red instead of rose water. Okay. Orange flower water. Oh. I can't verify orange flower water as period from sources, although it certainly is period plausible. Pistachios pressed into the top. Yep.
Actually, yeah, I did verify. It was a substitute in period.
Oh, awesome. Okay.
I've only just joined us. Can you hear me okay? Because it seems to be not a brilliant line today. Did you, sorry, I've missed your class. I was finding out about Indonesian 16th century drinks.
Okay.
But I wondered, did you talk about chicken in marzipan? Because the Denola has a marzipan for invalids, which has got poached chicken breast ground into the marzipan.
That's interesting. I haven't seen that recipe.
It's rather fabulous. It's still a sweet marzipan, just like your normal marzipan, but it just has a chicken breast, that you poach in water until it's cooked, and then you grind it in with the almonds and make the marzipan with this chicken, and then you roast it. It's worth a go. It's actually surprisingly good.
Okay. I wouldn't deny that. I'm used to thinking of marzipan as a meat-free dish, because almonds was one of the things that was allowed on meat-free days, like during Lent and so forth. So almonds would substitute during those days of the calendar when people weren't supposed to be eating meat. Although, I suppose if somebody's an invalid and they needed a little, I don't know, period chicken soup or the equivalent. Yeah.
Yeah, it's basically it takes your marzipan and kind of boosts up the protein and makes it kind of something that I guess is designed to tempt someone who's not feeling well, because it's still a sweet dish and stuff. So you're just giving them something a little bit sweet to eat, but that is then got kind of the extra goodness of chicken in it. I'll share a link on the food blog to my reproduction of the recipe, and you can, and anyone who's interested is welcome to have a look.
Very interested. Thank you very much. One thing I will add about the pronunciation, when I cook this, I use the German pronunciation, which would be Marzipan, and that's because a Z at the start of a syllable in German is pronounced like the letters TS in English. So think like it's Mozart, not Mozart, and so it's Marzipan instead of marzipan.
Nice
Because,
note.
yeah, the modern English word is, I mean, it used to be marchpane in late period, but what we say now is pretty much a loan word from German, and you know the pronunciation varies, but German's my second language, and so I usually use the German pronunciation. Ooh.
Oh, and that recipe also documents the use of orange flower water in it. So it's a 16th
Thank
century
you
recipe,
very much.
and it specifically uses orange flower water. So yeah, it's worth. It gives you, on that slightly earlier discussion of orange flower water, gives you a bit of documentation for your orange flower.
Okay, I'm going to close down a couple of windows here because I just got a low system resources warning. Is my audio okay? Okay.
It's a little wobbly, but you're doing fine.
Alrighty.
Yeah.
Alrighty.
It's
Um,
patchy but
okay.
understandable.
Agnes, someone asked a question in the chat, and I'm curious as well. How long does the marzipan keep?
Ooh, there's a good question. If you keep it in the fridge in a nice closed container, it's usually good for a couple of weeks. And it can be frozen.
Oh, okay, good. Good to know. Thank you.
I have found lost marzipan at the back of my fridge that was in a well zippied bag. I want to say literally a couple of months later, maybe longer, and it was still fine. So
Yeah.
the mileage may vary on. In the back of the fridge, I'd call it darn near indefinite, but make sure it's not fuzzy and doesn't smell funny.
Yeah, I mean, I would say conservatively a couple of weeks, but a couple of months is pretty realistic too. For some reason, in my home, it never seems to last more than a couple of weeks, so I can't really.
It got lost. Like it was one of those where I expected to find a science experiment because I'm like, when did we last make marzipan? I don't remember. Oh, it was like months ago. How is this still here? This is exciting. So I was very pleasantly surprised that it had survived for months, but surprised nonetheless.
I've kept it till it just dried out completely, and it was just a hard little candy then.
Yeah.
Still tasty.
Oh
It will keep pretty much indefinitely, depending on the ingredients of your particular marzipan. I would suggest that the one with chicken in it.
Maybe less so. Yeah, maybe less so.
Maybe less so. But the marzipan recipes, which are just almonds and rose water and sugar, there is pretty much nothing there that's going to go off. If it has egg white and it's baked, it probably is the same thing. And but
fair. I don't think mine had egg in it. I think I used an eggless recipe. So
yeah.
If I seem slightly distracted, it's because the sun is going down right now, and this is when we have the evening cat wrestling between the little brother and sister. So I'm kind of keeping an eye because they're from different litters, and the brother is a year older, and they're still best friends, but he's about twice the size of his little sister. So anyway, you have my almost undivided attention, as long as I don't have any little yelp from a little kitten saying, "Help, help, Mama." Oh, yes, okay, not going to eat them. Yeah, I would say 6-year-old marzipan animals, hand-painted, but they probably look gorgeous, don't they?
Yes. And remember, most modern wedding cakes have, well, actually really modern ones don't, but most traditional modern wedding cakes have a layer of marzipan in them. They have a fruit cake in the middle, a layer of marzipan, then a layer of the icing on the top, and people will keep the top tier of their wedding cake for a year and then eat it on their anniversary. So, and the marzipan is still perfectly fine for a year. So
I'm having visions of Miss Havisham in that description.
Do you not do that in the US? It's certainly was quite a tradition in Australia. Now, with more and more, we're having chocolate cakes and stuff like that, and they don't keep in the same sort of way as a fruit
It's a
cake does.
tradition. It was a traditional thing in Canada too. So I don't know. It might be Commonwealth.
Yeah.
The keeping of the cake, definitely. It tends not to be marzipan that they wrap cakes with here. It's fondant, and it's barely edible fresh.
Oh,
It's not at all like
Oh, dear.
marzipan. Marzipan
Yeah.
is wonderful and divine. Fondant is
what?
like eating spackle. I don't know. It's disgusting.
Okay. Ours tends to have a layer of marzipan and then a layer of icing over the top of the marzipan. So
Yeah, that's how we do Christmas cakes as well,
Hmm.
in Canada at least. Possibly just because my mother-in-law is from Britain. I think it's a Commonwealth thing.
My wedding cake had buttercream frosting, and we were able to keep it for a year. But you have to do a lot to keep it for a year, because you wrap it with parchment paper and you wrap it with butcher wrap, and then you put some foil on it, then put it all into plastic.
Mhm.
Let me just see. I want to see if there the references include. Yes, in the references, there's a documentary called "Made in Germany: Niederegger 7 Generations of Marzipan Makers" from DW Deutsche Welle. It's in English, but it's a documentary about basically the best German marzipan comes from the city of Lübeck, which was not only part of the Hanseatic League, but it was the original core city that founded the Hanseatic League. And it's got a centuries-old tradition of marzipan that continues today, and it's considered the best marzipan in Germany comes from Lübeck. It's way up in the north. And they have a documentary about the Niederegger family, which produces Niederegger marzipan. If you go and find it, some of the gourmet stores in the West Coast here in the States will sell you a little bar that's like maybe about yay big for $6 or $7. and they'll have they will have Niederegger Weissbrot, which is just marzipan, or Schwarzbrot, which is marzipan covered in chocolate. The Weissbrot would be white bread. Black bread would be covered in chocolate.
I can't imagine paying that much for marzipan, for a little
You
marzipan.
can once
I mean,
you've tried it once.
that's right. But I mean, what can you do to almonds, sugar, and
How do you make
rose
it
water
more
to
amazing?
make it worth that much money?
It's the quality. Nobody has ever quite duplicated the Niederegger family recipe. And if you actually go to their shop in Germany, they've got all kinds of pastries and stuff that are made with marzipan. You know, layers of stuff, and there's a layer of marzipan here, and then there's other stuff there, and the whole little torts. Oh,
Nice.
Germans know their pastries.
Yeah. Maybe they have a grinder, because this is one of the things for me in making marzipan is to use a mortar and pestle instead of using just ground almonds, because you get quite a different texture and quite a different flavor if you use a mortar and pestle, and because you're kind of pressing as you grind the marzipan, and you get this much kind of much more like peanut butter in texture just from grinding the almonds than you get from throwing your almonds in a blender or something. And if you put them in the blender, you get almond meal. You just get a kind of rough meal. Whereas if you actually grind it in the mortar and pestle, you end up with a paste almost.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the thing, is that they don't, they have some mechanism that actually allows them to grind or something like that, and that's what makes their marzipan special.
And if you try out different marzipans, the different grades of marzipan, you'll find that the highest grade tends to be that fine, creamy texture. And that the lower ones tend to be more gritty, a little bit more grainy, and also tend to be sweeter. You know, less almondy, less smooth, and that tends to be the difference that I've tasted. One of the challenges with a class like this, of course, is, you know, that there are different purposes for making marzipan. Sometimes just because it's so easy to make it, some ways, you know, this is something that if you're making it for a feast, you can just churn out a bunch of marzipan for that remove. And but if you wanted to make it for a you know, for a competition, then here we go. We'd be getting the mortar and pestle and grinding this all up. You would probably want to use bigger mortar and pestle than this, but you know, and following everything down to the letter and getting something that's very precise as a replication of what was done in the period, which is why for this recipe that we're using for this class, I've got two different methods, and one is sort of the shortcut starting with the almond flour, and the other is starting with the whole almonds.
It's really, it is quite a difference, isn't it? And I'm totally with you. I think, you know, depending on the occasion, you just, yes, buy the almond meal, for goodness sake.
Yeah.
You have a life. You're making marzipan for 250 people. Do not grind the almonds yourself.
Do not hand blanch every almond for 250 people.
When I do this the long way, most of the time is on the shucking after the blanching. That's about 90% of the work.
I don't find that too hard. The blanching, you know, I just put the hot water on, let it sit for a bit, and then put it in a tea towel and rub it in the tea towel.
Itself is simple, but getting all the skins off afterward, that's what takes time.
Rubbing it in a tea towel, that's all I do.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you just pop it in a tea towel or a towel and just push it around with the tea towel, and the tea towel grips onto the almond skins and will take them off, and then you just pick the almonds out from the thing. Yeah.
Useful trick. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
So anyway, you've got the full recipe along with the source, and then you've got my redaction, and so if you wanted to do your own version starting from any stage of this, you've got all of the information that you need for that, as well as, you know, my tips from trial and error along the way of the discovery, so that hopefully you don't have to reinvent the wheel. So we're at 5:53. If there are any other questions, that's good. Otherwise, I think I'll kick this back to the group. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for presenting.
Yeah, thank you. Always.
Okay.
Now I want marzipan.